Hello, my name's Nick Jakubowicz. I'm Professor of Oral Microbiology at Newcastle University and Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Dental Research. I'm really excited that we're able to put together a special issue this year on the relationship between oral and systemic diseases. So this is always an important topic in the field. Oral diseases are widely recognized as being the most prevalent conditions worldwide, and this is repeatedly shown in global burden of diseases studies and other studies around the world. Mostly we think of oral diseases and the direct impact that they cause. So of course, things like dental caries and abscesses can cause a lot of pain, whereas periodontal disease can cause all sorts of discomfort, difficulty eating, difficulty talking, and so on. And apart from these clear morbidities and that affect the quality of life of individuals, oral diseases are also responsible for an estimated $710 billion per year spent simply on treatment. And that doesn't even include costs for preventing oral diseases. So there's a huge economic burden behind them. Oral diseases do not occur in isolation. The mouth, of course, is just part of the human body. And we do know that oral diseases are closely linked with a number of systemic diseases. And that's what we will explore in this special issue. So the two guest editors of the special issue were Dr. Gustavo Garlet from the University of São Paulo in Brazil and Dr. Gustavo Nascimento from the University of Utah in the US. And they have set up interviews with authors of papers within the special issue to explore two very different aspects of the relationship between oral and systemic diseases. Dr. Garlet is going to interview Dr. David Wong, professor at UCLA, about a very nice paper on new methods for salivary diagnostics that potentially can be used for diagnosing cancer at distal sites. And they show this with preliminary data on gastric cancer. And Dr. Nascimento is going to interview Dr. Noha Gomaa, assistant professor at Western University in Canada, about her study on how social adversity impacts oral diseases, and not just oral diseases on their own, but also oral diseases as part of multimorbidity. Okay, so over to you, Dr. Garlet.
Thank you, Nick. I would like to thank you and thank you, David, for participating and joining us and for the contribution to the special edition with a very nice paper with the topic of using saliva extracellular particles to track cancer biomarkers and specifically in saliva. And David, could you give us an overview of the study, please?
Be glad to, Gustavo, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work. In this study, we set out to answer a fundamental question in oral systemic field. Can extracellular particles, particularly those that are released by tumors, be traced across different compartments of the body? And can saliva reliably capture these systemic signals? To investigate this, we use human gastric cancer as a disease model and apply two advanced technologies. The first is Bessel beam excitation separation BEST, an acoustofluidic platform that isolate high quality, high purity extracellular vesicles and particles from very small amount of tissues. The second is multi-parametric biochip assay that allow us to interrogate individual EV particles with high resolution that detect their microRNA cargo using internal reflection fluorescent microscopy. Using these tools, we analyze pair samples, tissue, gastric cancer tissues, plasma, and saliva from the same patient. What we found is that the same tumor-associated microRNA are present within these EVs across the three bodily fluids. And importantly, saliva showed the strongest diagnostic signal. This indicates that saliva is not only accessible and non-invasive, but also a biologically rich reservoir of systemic cancer information. It should be noted that while the basal beam excitation separation and the multiparametric bioassay of the most state-of-the-art technology, they were independently carried out by investigators at Duke and Ohio State independently. These independent execution strengthened the objectivity of the work. In brief, the study provides mechanistic evidence that tumor-derived signal traffic to the oral cavity via extracellular vesicles, and then saliva can serve as a powerful non-invasive biofluid for early cancer detection.
Yeah, usually researchers think about saliva as a potential oral disease marker, but your study broadened this concept and highlighted this important connection with systemic pathology. What do you see as major opportunities and challenges to using saliva for the diagnosis of systemic diseases?
Well, the most exciting outcome of the work is as you said, is the growing recognition that saliva is not just a local biofluid, but is a window into systemic biology. That opened up in several major opportunities. First, saliva enables truly non-invasive, repeatable screening. This is transformative for early detection of diseases such as cancer, cardiometabolic disorders, and autoimmune conditions. The ability to collect high-quality samples outside of clinical setting, including at home, makes saliva an ideal medium for population-level screening and longitudinal monitoring. Second, saliva turned out to be a remarkably rich in extracellular vesicles and particles that carry organ-derived molecular cargo, including microRNAs, circulating tumor DNA, and other omics constituents. As our studies show, these vesicles provide mechanistic continuity between internal pathology and what we can measure in the oral cavity. This strengthens saliva's potential to complement and in some cases outperform blood-based diagnostic. Third, saliva diagnostic can democratize healthcare because collection is easy, low cost, and does not require trained personnel. Saliva-based tests can reach underserved, settings where traditional, diagnostics are impractical.
You already mentioned some possibilities, and the technologies in this paper are really exciting. And specifically, where you and your group plan to go next with that?
One of the most exciting outcomes are these technology that open up doors to systemic single particle resolution mapping of disease signals across the entire body. I often equate this to observation to deciphering the vehicles that package these cargoes and conveyed organ-specific biomarkers from organopathology to circulation, lymphatics, and into salivary gland. Was it a Toyota? Or was it a Land Rover? Or was it a Tesla? We now have the ability to zoom down to that granularity, the molecular level of identifying how this trafficking occur. Building of these capabilities, the next steps it falls into three major directions, so to speak. First is we scale these platforms to a larger clinically diverse cohorts. This special issue emphasizes rigor and translational relevance. Our goal is to take this technology from proof of concept into statistically powered clinical studies. This includes evaluating whether AV's cargo in saliva can detect other gastrointestinal disorders, as well as systemic cancers, and whether these signals appear early enough for population-level screening. Second, we are advancing this technology themselves. The acoustofluidic BEST platform will be optimized for higher throughput and integration into automated workflow. On the analytical side, the single particle biochip assay will incorporate multiplexing so that we can simultaneously detect microRNA, circulating tumor DNA, and other omics targets in the same particle. Ultimately, we envision turning these systems into compact, clinically deployable devices. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we aim to use this tool to understand the biology of extracellular particles trafficking, how tumor-derived particles can move from deep organs into circulation and eventually into saliva. This is a fundamentally unexplored pathway, and mechanistic insight will allow us to design more precise diagnostic assays and uncover new therapeutic opportunities. The long-term vision perhaps is a new generation of saliva-based non-invasive diagnostic that are mechanistically grounded, scalable, and clinically transformative.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, I would like to thank you again for joining us. Thank you again for the very nice contribution to the special issue, and looking forward for the new studies coming on this line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Happy holidays.
Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. And now we're going to hear from Drs. Nascimento and Gomaa about the social adversity and the impact on oral health.
So hi everyone, I'm Gus Nascimento, Professor of Population Health at University of Utah School of Dentistry and one of the guest editors of this Journal of Dental Research special issue on oral and systemic disease relationship. Today I'm really happy to be joined by Dr. Noha Gomaa, Assistant Professor of the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry, Western University in Canada, and the Director of the Society to Cell Oral Health Research Lab. She is the senior author of the paper, Social Adversity Is Causally Linked to Multimorbidity Including Oral Condition. Noha, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Gus. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Good. So let's start with the big picture then. In this study that was accepted in the JDR, you used data from over 23,000 participants in the Canadian longitudinal study on aging, and you show that people experiencing social adversity, they are more likely to develop both oral conditions and multimorbidity that includes oral conditions over time. So for colleagues who haven't read the paper yet, and I advise them to do it, how did you define and measure social adversity in this cohort? And what do you see as the key causal findings that change how we think the relationship or how we about the oral health in aging populations?
Great, thank you for the question. So I will start off by acknowledging the first author on the paper as well, Alex Sasimetsi, who completed this work as part of his Master of Science thesis in my lab. And Alex has recently defended his thesis, has now gone into places. So it's been a real pleasure working with him on this paper. So to your question, in this study, we define social adversity as the combination of low economic capital, low income essentially, and low social capital, which is poor social networks, isolation, limited social support. And these measures were combined to capture both financial and social disadvantage at baseline. So one thing that we like to do in my group is for our work to be driven by theory. And this paper particularly tested a theory that, I came across many, many years ago, which is the fundamental cause theory by Lincoln Phelan, whereby access to resources are beyond determinants or the so-called distal risk factors, as they're often referred to, right? But now we know they're causal. And with the advent or the rise of causal inference methods, if you will, the causal role of social and environmental factors was something that we were really, really interested in looking at in relation to oral health and how it fits in the overall health picture. And interestingly, what we found was that at baseline, using the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, as you've pointed out, people who were, or participants who were exposed to social adversity at baseline, 7 years down the line, later on developed oral conditions or complained of poor self-reported oral health and multimorbid conditions. So it all points out to how the fundamental cause theory is actually, valid, and we should be referring to them as causes of oral diseases.
Well, that's really interesting, Noha. So one thing that I really like about your paper is that you don't treat oral health in isolation, like as the theme of this special issue, right? You look specifically at multimorbidity patterns that include oral conditions instead of just, single disease in isolation. So from your results, what did you learn about like how oral conditions they kind of stick together with systemic disease over time, and how does that support the idea that oral health should be embedded in broader chronic disease and multimorbidity frameworks rather than just being kept in its own silo?
Right. Great question. Thank you for raising this. So, there are, and I think you will agree with me, there are a number of false dichotomies that we have in dentistry and in oral health care in general. And the most famous one being this oral versus systemic disease kind of thing, right? Or mouth versus body. And we continue to design studies, even though we talk about oral systemic health, we continue to design studies in ways where oral diseases are the exposure, and then everything else is the outcome. And there is value in looking at oral diseases as an exposure and other health outcomes as the outcome. Like, for example, if you're looking at severe early childhood caries and how that associates with school achievement, for example, there is value in this part. But then for other conditions, when we're looking at something that is supposed to capture the cumulative burden of non-communicable chronic diseases, such as multimorbidity, it makes sense for us to start looking at oral diseases or oral conditions as part of this construct, right? What we do by having oral diseases on the left side of the equation is unintentionally having the general scientific community and the medical community even not looking at something as fundamental as tooth loss or edentalism as part of multimorbidity definitions. And so when my lab started looking at multimorbidity a few years back, and we started looking at the definitions in different parts of the world and in the literature, there was nothing there on oral health. You see things like metabolic disorders, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and cognitive function, mental health disorders, many things. And I'm referring particularly to the public health definition by the Public Health Agency of Canada, which has many conditions. But you don't find anything on oral health. Periodontitis is not there. If you look at the literature on aging and multimorbidity, something as important as edentalism is not there. And so what we decided to do then is, we wanted to demonstrate that oral health should not really be listed or siloed as a different part of the health outcomes, and that we need to put it together on the same side of the equation with multimorbidity. And what we've been able to do in this study is a confirmation of what we have known for quite some time about the shared and common risk factors, and that the fact that we should be looking at oral health as part of the general health outcome.
That's great. Well, that's very interesting, Noha. So this article clearly fits into a larger body of your work on social and economic capital, psychosocial stress, and life course influences on oral health and morbidity. How does this social adversity paper move that program of research forward? And what are the next directions you are most excited about? Whether that's new methods, mechanisms, or policy work that you think that the JDR readers should be watching for?
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to highlight this, Gus. So in my lab, we are very, very interested in understanding the early onset and pathways along the life course that contribute to oral diseases and their interconnectedness with other chronic conditions, right? And so as a sequel to this paper, actually, we're now delving into biological mechanisms underlying adversity, or what we have previously referred to as a socio-exposome. So very briefly, to just give you a sneak peek, we're seeking or seeing actually interesting associations between accelerated biological aging, for example, which is essentially the difference between chronological age and the cellular age in our body. And we're doing this using various epigenetic clocks. And what we're seeing is interesting links between accelerated aging and oral diseases and multimorbidity combined. And what's more is that these connections can be tracked back to adverse social and behavioral exposures at baseline. And we're looking at it from a biopsychosocial framework, attributing it to psychosocial factors, particularly stressful conditions at baseline that eventually are associated with oral diseases and multimorbidity. So stay tuned for some interesting findings, hopefully coming soon.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Well, Noha, thank you so much for sharing your insights and for contributing this important work to the JDR special issue on oral and systemic disease. Again, I'm Gus Nascimento, Professor of Population Health at the University of Utah and one of the guest editors of this special issue. The paper we've been discussing is titled Social Adversity Is Causally Linked to Multimorbidity Including Oral Conditions. We invite you to read the full article and explore the rest of the special issue, which brings together cutting-edge work on how oral health and systemic conditions intersect across the life course. Thank you so much for watching.
Okay, great. So we've heard two very interesting interviews about papers that have been included in the special issue on very different topics. This special issue also includes both mechanistic and epidemiological evidence on a variety of conditions and links between oral diseases and systemic conditions. For example, there are several papers on links between periodontitis and systemic diseases, including diabetes, systemic bone loss, cancer of various sorts, and cardiovascular diseases. And while there's a lot of evidence that periodontitis is associated with a number of systemic conditions, it's not always the case that there's an association. So some aspects of cardiovascular diseases, for example, are not associated with periodontitis. The special issue also looks at aging and shows the importance of maintaining a good dentition and masticatory function and avoiding oral frailty in order to protect against things like cognitive decline and dementia and so on during aging. So just as oral diseases are not isolated from systemic diseases, so care pathways need to be integrated. And one interesting paper in this special issue shows a new way to use artificial intelligence to try and link medical and dental records so that we can at least integrate aspects of care across medicine and dentistry. So this special issue provides new insights that should help us to manage both oral and systemic diseases in many different ways. And we hope that this will provide some inspiration for you to build new areas of research within this very important domain, and hopefully to find new solutions to improve both oral and general health. So we hope you enjoy reading this special issue. Thank you.